Hey everyone, Tutor Brian here. This is a book review of the historical fiction novel Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. It is set in England during the early 1500s in the time of King Henry VIII, Queen Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, and other important figures in the royal court. However, the main character is actually Thomas Cromwell, the second in command to Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, who himself is Lord Chancellor, Papal Legate, and more importantly, chief advisor to King Henry. Eventually, though, Thomas Cromwell rises to power and becomes the guy, as his former master Thomas Wolsey falls from grace. The way the novel is constructed is that it takes the historical facts and imagines the stories surrounding them, fleshing out various details such as what the people were like, how they interacted together, what they said to each other, and some of the smaller things that may have occurred under the umbrella of the bigger things that really happened. Central to all of this is Thomas Cromwell, whose personal story is woven in and out of the timeline of historical events that ultimately culminates in the English Reformation. The character development is compelling and the dialogue is excellent, displaying wit, humor, and great insight. But you don't have to take my word for it, because I will be reading a few pages that showcase the author's writing and also highlight Thomas Cromwell's competency in delicately and deftly handling social situations involving his peers as well as those above his station. A word of warning: it is an adult book for language, violence, innuendo, and that sort of thing. But nothing is done in overly poor taste. It all serves the author's purposes and goals. In fact, the bluntness makes for some of the humor. One minor issue I had when reading Wolf Hall was the pronoun ambiguity. When it writes, he does this or he says that, it is not always clear whom the he is referring to. But short of calling everyone by name all the time, there's not much that can be done for this issue. Be that as it may, many of the characters share the same first name, such as Henry or Thomas or Mary. It can be difficult to keep up at times. Even the King of Spain is not often directly called Charles, but simply referred to as the Emperor. Also, prior knowledge of the history is not entirely necessary, as the writing fills in a lot of the blanks regarding pertinent information, while the first few pages of the book contain a list of characters with brief descriptions, alongside a few diagrams of the royal family tree, all of which can help with understanding. Anyways, here I go with the readings. Sit back, relax, enjoy, and please forgive any mispronunciations or anything in the text that can be potentially construed as offensive. Here goes. Here is an interaction involving Thomas Cromwell and Anne Boleyn. 8 anterooms. In the last, where the cardinal should be, he finds Anne Boleyn. Look, there are Solomon and Sheba unrolled again, back on the wall. There is a draft. Sheba eddies toward him, rosy, round, and he acknowledges her. Ansoma, lady maid of wool, I thought I'd never see you again. He had sent word back to Antwerp, applied discreetly for news. Ansoma was married, Stephen Bond said, and to a younger man, a banker. So if he drowns or anything, he said, let me know. Bond writes back, Thomas, come now, isn't England full of widows, and fresh young girls? Sheba makes Anne look bad, sallow and sharp. She stands by the window, her fingers tugging and ripping at a sprig of rosemary. When she sees him, she drops it, and her hands dip back into her trailing sleeves. In December, the king gave a banquet to celebrate her father's elevation to be Earl of Wiltshire. The queen was elsewhere, and Anne sat where Catherine should sit. There was frost on the ground, frost in the atmosphere. They only heard of it in the Wolsey household. The Duchess of Norfolk, who was always furious about something, was furious that her niece should have precedence. The Duchess of Suffolk, Henry's sister, refused to eat. Neither of these great ladies spoke to Boleyn's daughter. Nevertheless, Anne had taken her place as the first lady of the kingdom. But now it's the end of Lent, and Henry has gone back to his wife. He hasn't the face to be with his concubine as we move toward the week of Christ's Passion. Her father is abroad on diplomatic business. So is her brother George, now Lord Rochford. So is Thomas Wyatt, the poet whom she tortures. She's alone and bored at York Place, and she's reduced to sending for Thomas Cromwell to see if he offers any amusement. A flurry of little dogs, 3 of them, run away from her skirts, yapping, darting toward him. "Don't let them out," Anne says, and with practiced and gentle hands he scoops them up. They are the kind of dogs, Bellas, with ragged ears and tiny wafting tails, that any merchant's wife would keep across the narrow sea. By the time he has given them back to her, they have nibbled his fingers and his coat, licked his face, and yearned toward him with goggling eyes, as if he were someone they had so much longed to meet. 2 of them he sets gently on the floor. The smallest he hands back to Anne. "Vous êtes gentil," she says, "and how my babies like you. I could not love, you know, those apes that Catherine keeps, les singes enchaînés, their little hands, their little necks fettered. My babies love me for myself." She's so small, her bones are delicate, her waist so narrow. If 2 law students make 1 cardinal, 2 Annes make 1 Catherine. Various women are sitting on low stools, sewing, or rather pretending to sew. One of them is Mary Boleyn. She keeps her head down, as well she might. One of them is Mary Shelton, a bold pink and white Boleyn cousin, who looks him over, and quite obviously says to herself, "Mother of God, is that the best Lady Carey thought she could get?" Back in the shadows there is another girl, who has her face turned away, trying to hide. He does not know who she is, but he understands why she's looking fixedly at the floor. Anne seems to inspire it. Now that he's put the dogs down, he's doing the same thing. "Allors," Anne says softly, "suddenly everything is about you. The king does not cease to quote Master Cromwell." She pronounces it as if she can't manage the English. Cromwell. "He is so right. He is at all points correct. Also, let us not forget, Maitre Cromwell makes us laugh." "I see the king does sometimes laugh, but you, madame, in your situation, as you find yourself," a black glance over her shoulder, "I suppose I seldom laugh, if I think, but I had not thought. This is what your life has come to." Dusty fragments, dried leaves and stems, have fallen down her skirts. She stares out at the morning. "Let me put it this way," he says. "Since my Lord Cardinal was reduced, how much progress have you seen in your cause?" "None. No one knows the workings of Christian countries like my Lord Cardinal. No one is more intimate with kings. Think how bound to you he would be, Lady Anne, if you were the means of erasing these misunderstandings and restoring him to the king's grace." She doesn't answer. "Think," he says. "He is the only man in England who can obtain for you what you need." "Very well, make his case. You have 5 minutes. Otherwise I can see you're really busy." Anne looks at him with dislike and speaks in French. "What do you know of how I occupy my hours?" "My lady, are we having this conversation in English or French? Your choice entirely. But let's make it one or the other, yes?" He sees a movement from the corner of his eye. The half-hidden girl has raised her face. She is plain and pale. She looks shocked. "You are indifferent?" Anne says. "Yes." "Very well, in French." He tells her again, the cardinal is the only man who can deliver a good verdict from the Pope. He is the only man who can deliver the king's conscience and deliver it clean. She listens. He will say that for her. He has always wondered how well women can hear beneath the muffling folds of their veils and hoods, but Anne does give the impression that she is hearing what he has said. She waits him out. At least, she doesn't interrupt, until at last she does. "So," she says, "if the king wants it, and the cardinal wants it, he who was formerly the chief subject in the kingdom, then I must say, Master Cromwell, it is all taking a marvelous long while to come to pass." From her corner her sister adds, barely audible, "And she's not getting any younger."
Not a stitch have the women added to their sewing since he has been in the room. One may resume, he asks, persuading her. There is a moment left? Oh yes, Anne says, but a moment only. In Lent I ration my patience. He tells her to dismiss the slanderers who claim that the cardinal obstructed her cause. He tells her how it distresses the cardinal that the king should not have his heart's desire, which was ever the cardinal's desire too. He tells her how all the king's subjects repose their hopes in her for an heir to the throne, and how he is sure they are right to do so. He reminds her of the many gracious letters she has written to the cardinal in times past, all of which he has on file. Very nice, she says, when he stops. Very nice, Master Cromwell, but try again. One thing, one simple thing we asked of the cardinal, and he would not. One simple thing. You know it was not simple. Perhaps I am a simple person, Anne says. Do you feel I am? You may be. I hardly know you. The reply incenses her. He sees her sister smirk. You may go, Anne says, and Mary jumps up and follows him out. Once again, Mary's cheeks are flushed, her lips are parted. She's brought her sewing with her, which she thinks is strange, but perhaps, if she leaves it behind, Anne pulls the stitches out. Out of breath again, Lady Carey? We thought she might run up and slap you. Will you come again? Shelton and I can't wait. Next, an interaction involving Thomas Cromwell and his rival Stephen Gardiner. The king can be elusive. One day, when he thinks he has an appointment to meet Henry, he gets Master Secretary instead. Sit down, Gardiner says. Sit down and listen to me. Contain yourself in patience while I put you straight on a few matters. He watches him ranging to and fro, Stephen the noonday devil. Gardiner is a man with bones loose-jointed, his lines flowing with menace. He has great hairy hands, and knuckles which crack when he folds his right fist into his left palm. He takes away the menace conveyed, and the message. Pausing in the doorway, he says mildly, Your cousin sends greetings. Gardiner stares at him. His eyebrows bristle like a dog's hackles. He thinks that Cromwell presumes. Not the king, he says soothingly. Not his majesty. I mean your cousin Richard Williams. Aghast, Gardiner says, That old tale. Oh come, he says, it's no disgrace to be a royal pea. Or so we think in my family. In your family, what grasp have they on propriety? I have no interest in this young person, recognize no kinship with him, and I will do nothing for him. Truly, you don't need to. He calls himself Richard Cromwell now. As he is going, really going, this time, he adds, Don't let it keep you awake, Stephen. I have been into the matter. You may be related to Richard, but you are not related to me. He smiles. Inside, he is beside himself with rage, running with it, as if his blood were thin and full of dilute venom like the uncolored blood of a snake. As soon as he gets home to Austin Friars, he hugs Rafe Sadler and makes his hair stand up in spikes. Heaven direct me, boy or hedgehog? Rafe, Richard, I am feeling penitent. It is the season, Rafe says. I want, he says, to become perfectly calm. I want to be able to get into the coop without ruffling the chicken's feathers. I want to be less like Uncle Norfolk and more like Marlinspike. He has a long soothing talk in Welsh with Richard, who laughs at him because old words are fading from his memory, and he is forever sliding through bits of English with a sly borderlands intonation. He gives his little nieces the pearl and coral bracelets he bought them weeks ago, but forgot to give. He goes down to the kitchen and makes suggestions, all of them cheerful. He calls his household staff together, his clerks. We need to plan it, he says, how the cardinal will be made comfortable on the road, north. He wants to go slowly so the people can admire him. He needs to arrive in Peterborough for Holy Week, and from there shift by stages to Southwell, where he will plan his further progress to York. The Archbishop's palace at Southwell has good rooms, but still we may need to get builders in. Next, an interaction involving Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, plus the king. He says to Norfolk, Well, my lord, how shall we do this? Do you want him gone or not? Yes? Then come to the king with me. Norfolk grunts. Messages are sent. A day or so later, they find themselves together in an antechamber. They wait. Norfolk paces. Oh, by St. Jude, the Duke says. Shall we get some fresh air, or don't you lawyers need it? They stroll in the gardens, or he strolls, the Duke stamps. When do the flowers come out? The Duke says. When I was a boy, we never had flowers. It was Buckingham, you know, who brought in this knot garden sort of stuff. Oh dear, it was fancy. The Duke of Buckingham, keen gardener, had his head cut off for treason. That was 1521, less than 10 years ago. It seems sad to mention it now, in the presence of the spring, singing from every bush, every bough. A summons is received. As they proceed to their interview, the Duke balks and jibs. His eye rolls and his nostrils distend. His breath comes short. When the Duke lays a hand on his shoulder, he is forced to slow his pace, and they scuffle along, he resisting his impulse to pull away, like two war veterans in a beggar's procession. Scaramella ba'alagera. Norfolk's hand is trembling, but it is only when they get into the presence that he fully understands how it rattles the old Duke to be in a room with Henry Tudor. The gilded ebullience makes him shrink inside his clothes. Henry greets them cordially. He says it is a wonderful day and pretty much a wonderful world. He spins around the room, arms wide, reciting some verses of his own composition. He will talk about anything except the cardinal. Frustrated, Norfolk turns a dusky red and begins to mutter. Dismissed, they are backing out. Henry calls, "Oh, Cromwell." He and the Duke exchange glances. "By the mass," mutters the Duke. Hand behind his back, he indicates, "Begone, my Lord Norfolk. I'll catch up with you later." Henry stands with arms folded, eyes on the ground. He says nothing until he, Cromwell, has come close. £1,000, Henry whispers. It is on the tip of his tongue to say, that would be a start on the 10,000 which, to the best of my knowledge and belief, you have owed the Cardinal of York for a decade now. He doesn't say it, of course. At such moments, Henry expects you to fall to your knees, Duke, Earl, Commoner, light and heavy, old and young. He does it. Scar tissue pulls. Few of us, by our 40s, are not carrying injuries. The king signals, "You can get up." He adds, his tone curious. The Duke of Norfolk shows you many marks of friendship and favor. The hand on the shoulder, he means, the minute and unexpected vibration of ducal palm against plebeian muscle and bone. The Duke is careful to preserve all distinctions of rank. Henry seems relieved. An unwelcome thought creeps into his head. What if you, Henry Tudor, were to be taken ill and fall at my feet? Am I allowed to pick you up, or must I send for an earl to do it, or a bishop? Henry walks away. He turns and says in a small voice, "Every day I miss the Cardinal of York." There is a pause. He whispers, "Take the money with our blessing. Don't tell the Duke. Don't tell anyone. Ask your master to pray for me. Tell him it is the best I can do." The thanks he makes, still from his kneeling situation, is eloquent and extensive. Henry looks at him bleakly and says, "Dear God, Master Cromwell, you can talk, can't you?" He goes out, face composed, fighting the impulse to smile broadly. Scaramella falagala. Every day I miss the Cardinal of York. Norfolk says, What did he say?" "Oh, nothing," he says. "Just some special hard words he wants me to convey to the Cardinal." Next, an interaction involving Thomas Cromwell, Queen Catherine, and Princess Mary. The Queen speaks in English. "Do you know who this is? This is Master Cromwell, who now writes all the laws." Caught awkwardly between languages, he says, "Madame, shall we go on in English or Latin?" Your cardinal would ask the same question, as if I were a stranger here. I will say to you, as I said to him, that I was first addressed as Princess of Wales when I was 3 years old. I was 16 when I came here to marry my Lord Arthur. I was a virgin and 17 when he died. I was 24 years old when I became Queen of England, and I will say, for the avoidance of doubt, that I am at present aged 46, and still Queen, and by now, I believe, a sort of Englishwoman. But I shall not repeat to you everything that I told the Cardinal. I imagine he left you notes on these things. He feels he should bow. The Queen says, Since the year began, they have brought certain bills into Parliament. Until now, Master Cromwell's talent was for money lending, but now he finds he has a talent for legislation too. If you want a new law, just ask him. I hear that at night you take the drafts to your house in... Where is your house? She makes it sound like your dog hole. Mary says, these laws are written against the church. I wonder that our lords allow it. You know, the Queen says, that the Cardinal of York was accused under the Premier laws of usurping your Lord Father's jurisdiction as ruler of England. Now Master Cromwell and his friends find all the clergy complicit in that crime, and ask them to pay a fine of more than £100,000. Not a fine. We call it a benevolence. I call it extortion. She turns to her daughter. If you ask why the church is not defended, I can only tell you that there are noblemen in this land, Suffolk, she means Norfolk, who have been heard to say they will pull the power of the church down, that never again will they suffer. They use the word. A church meant to grow so great as our late legate, that we need no new Wolsey. I concur. With the attacks on the bishops, I do not concur. Wolsey was to me an enemy. That does not alter my feelings toward our Holy Mother the Church. He thinks. Wolsey was to me a father and a friend. That does not alter my feelings toward our Holy Mother the Church. You and Speaker Audley, you put your heads together by candlelight. The Queen mentions the Speaker's name as if she were saying, your kitchen boy. And when the morning comes, you induce the King to describe himself as head of the Church in England. Whereas, the child says, the Pope is head of the Church everywhere, and from the throne of St. Peter flows the lawfulness of all government, from no other source. Lady Mary, he says, will you not sit? He catches her just as she folds at the knees and eases her down onto the stool. It is just the heat, he says, so she will not be ashamed. She turns up her eyes, shallow and gray, with a look of simple gratitude, and as soon as she is seated, the look is replaced by an expression as stony as the wall of a town under siege. You say induce, he tells Catherine, but your Highness, above anyone, knows that the King cannot be led, but he may be enticed. She turns to Mary, whose arms have crept over her belly. So your father, the King, is named head of the Church, and to soothe the conscience of the bishops, they have caused this formula to be inserted, as far as the law of Christ allows. What does that mean? Mary says. It means nothing. Your Highness, it means everything. Yes, it is very clever. I beg you, he says, to consider it this way, that the King has merely defined a position previously held, one that ancient precedents invented these last months show as his right. Under her clumsy gablehood, Mary's forehead is slick with sweat. She says, what is defined can be redefined, yes? Indeed, her mother says, and redefined in favor of the Church, if only I fall in with their wishes and put myself out of the estate of queen and wife. The princess is right, he thinks. There is room for negotiation. Nothing here is irrevocable. No, you wait to see what I will bring to your treaty table. Catherine holds out her hands, little, stubby, puffy hands, to show that they are empty. Only Bishop Fisher defends me. Only he has been constant. Only he is able to tell the truth, which is that the House of Commons is full of heathens. She sighs, her hands fall at her sides. And now, under what persuasion has my husband ridden off without a farewell? He has not done so before, never. He means to hunt out of Chertsey for a few days. With the woman, Mary says, the person. Then he will ride by way of Guildford to visit Lord Sandys. He wants to see his handsome new gallery at the Vine. His tone is easy, soothing, like the Cardinal's. Perhaps too much so? From there, depending on the weather and the game, he will go to William Paulet at Basing. I am to follow when? He will return in a fortnight, God willing. A fortnight, Mary says, alone with the person. Before then, madam, you are to go to another palace. He has chosen the Moor in Hertfordshire, which you know is very comfortable. Being the Cardinal's house, Mary says, it would be lavish. My own daughters, he thinks, would never have spoken so. Princess, he says, will you, out of your charity, cease to speak ill of a man who never did you harm? Mary blushes from neckline to hairline. I did not mean to fail in charity. The late cardinal is your godfather. You owe him your prayers. Her eyes flicker toward him. She looks cowed. I pray to shorten his term in purgatory. Catherine interrupts her. Send a box to Hertfordshire. Send a package. Do not seek to send me. You shall have your whole court. The household is ready for 200. I shall write to the king. You may carry the letter. My place is with him. My advice, he says, take this gently, or he indicates the princess. His hands join and drift apart, separate you. The child is fighting down pain. Her mother is fighting down grief and anger and disgust and fear. I expected this, she says, but I did not expect he would send a man like you to tell me. He frowns. Does she think it would come better from Norfolk? They say you had a trade as a blacksmith. Is that correct? Now she will say, shoe a horse? It was my father's trade. I begin to understand you, she nods. The blacksmith makes his own tools.